Very good. All right, so welcome everybody. This is Sue Barton, Engagement Optimization Manager for Modio Health. Today we're going to cover in our Modio University session, our topic is going to be healthcare payer, tracking and reporting. Marie Robertson, who's actually one of our project managers, will be leading the session today. So thank you for joining. Marie?
All right. So like Sue was saying, we're just going to go over adding some healthcare payers to provider profiles. We'll look at copying those from a template, and then we'll also look at launching tracking from payers. And then at the very end, we'll go into some reporting. So I'm in our demo team here in OneView, and I'm just going to go ahead and add payers to a provider profile. So I'm going to pull up a provider here. So we're going to use this guy. And under his healthcare payers, you can see he doesn't have any added. So to add them, I can either use this add button to add them one by one. I'll want to link them to a practice to be able to open tracking. If you don't add a practice in, the star to launch tracking won't appear, and we'll look at that in a minute. So I'll add the payer name. If I have a specific category plan, I could put that in there. And I would set a payer status probably of pending if I'm just starting an enrollment, or if it's active, I could do active and add an effective date and provider number. I'll put this in pending. So when I click save, you'll see that payer's been added. So if I have just a few payers or I'm adding like a single additional payer, I'll use this add button here. If I want to add a whole list, I'll usually use this copy function and copy from either another provider or a template that I've set up. So for this one, I'll copy from another provider, which is a facility we have in this demo team that could be set up sort of like a template. So you can see when I select another provider here under copy, the payer names all come down here, and I can even narrow these down if there's certain ones I don't want. So if I copy from this template and I say, actually, I already have Medicare added, I can remove that one. I can also choose what fields to bring in this box here. So I can bring in the payer state. I can also bring in the category plan, the PAR status, or payer contact if I want to bring that in from the template I'm copying from. And then finally, I can select the payer status. So I'm saying when you bring in all these payers, what status do you want them to be at? If it's a new provider that you're about to enroll, usually you'll have them as pending, and that's what auto selects anyways. So when I click save, that will copy in all the payers. You'll notice that they're not linked to a practice. So I have to go in and add those. So when I add the practice, this dropdown will show practices that are associated with this provider under practice employer, and I can select which ones to add. You can add as many as are associated with the provider here, or you can just add one. Something to point out when you add more than one practice is that you can save information at the payer level or at the payer and location specific level. So if I don't select into an individual practice, I can put a status, provider number, effective date, any of these fields at the payer level, which suggests that it applies to all the practices associated. If, for instance, I enrolled Canyon Vista Medical Center later than this other location, they might have a different effective date. So if I want to add any information that's specific to that location, I would just click on it. And then you can see the header pops up for that location, and there's space to add in location-specific information. So say I want to add a status on here and also on this other practice. Let's say this one is not enrolled. I can also add a status on just the main payer by closing out that location and add a status on here. So I'll leave that as pending just to show you guys what that looks like. So now you can see both of these locations are now tied to this payer, and you can see the status overall and at the location level. So same thing with if you add provider numbers or effective dates, they'll appear in line with what they apply to, the payer overall or a specific location. So, and if I'm just adding one location, I don't need to really drill down into the specific. I can just put any payer information on the general level. But for different clients, you can really manage your workflow however works best for you if you want to use these fields or the location specific fields. All right, so that's adding payers. Sue, is there anything you wanted me to add there?
So there is one question, Marie. How do other locations added able to show under the practice employer?
I'm not sure what that means. So are we saying like when, like how do I get other locations to show up to be able to be added here?
That's what it looks like it says. Yeah, so under practice employer, again, I think for normal process from a credentialing profile perspective, we always want to get the practice employer and facility affiliations built out first before we come down to healthcare payers. Yep. So Cindy, was that actually your question, just to clarify?
Well, no, to clarify, it was, so we have multiple locations for some of our practices, and they don't show in the practice, you know, the employer practice page. How is that added to be able to add them so it does pull down? So when we're doing this, we can show every location that they're under.
Sorry, I was muted. So if you are going to add a practice and you don't see it on this drop down here, so this one only has these two.
Right.
Then you would go back to practice, employer, or facility affiliations and make sure the practice you need is added here, because it will only display what practices are linked to the provider. So for this, it's only showing me these two locations. But if I want to add others, I just click the add button. And then I'll add one here. So if I add another practice here, this will now show up on that drop down for the payer as an option to add.
If it's not added in the master, does it need to be added in the master list or the master practice list or whatever in order for it to be a drop down, in order for it to show?
Yes, I think so. So what she's referring to is when I added this name, you can see that a lot of the information is pre-filled in because we have this as a master record in our database. So when any of our clients come on, we work with them to get all of their locations added as master records, just so that people aren't having to data enter all this information and potentially have errors each time. So some of our, some parts of OneView do require you to have things pulling from master record in order to use them, just because they know it's more accurate. I know sometimes forms will only use a master record, but.
So this is really because of my older clients that have, you know, one has 6 locations, the other one has 5 locations. They don't pull from the master record in order to add them. So I'd have to add them to the master record in order for them to show.
Yes, well, let me see if it works to just add one without it. Okay. I'll just add one in here as so it will, if you add a practice that's not pulling from a master record, it'll prompt you to email updates at Modio Health to get that added. But if you don't, let's see if this still gives me an option to add it to my payers. Yeah, so it looks like only those 3 practices are giving me an option. It's not letting me bring in the one that I just added without doing a master record. So for clients, if they're adding a new practice, it's important that they actually send that through updates at Modio Health so we can get that added as a master record. That also is really helpful for them in the long run too, because like I was saying, you'll get less data entry errors. Let me pull up one that's pulling from master record because a lot of it's already filled in. Also for them, if something about that practice changes, like say the fax number, they can actually just update that on the master record and it will be updated across any provider associated with that rather than having to go into every single provider who has that and change that fax number.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So yeah, like Sue was saying, it's important to kind of, before you load your payers, make sure your practice employer and facility affiliations is set up so that when you go to do it, the options that you actually need are there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I see one other question in chat. Let's see. So Anne is asking, can the same process be used for the payers, meaning, let's see. Oh, so like for if a payer has Blue Cross Blue Shield commercial and Medicare and they have different effective dates, yeah, you can definitely still use that. So how I would probably track that is adding 2 different line items for Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Okay, that's what I wondered. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would use the category plan field. So I would do associate with the practice and then do blue, if I can type. Blue Cross Blue Shield, and then put commercial, payer status active, effective date 1. And then I would add another line item for there we go. Just the commercial. Okay, there we go. And then this could be like in progress with no effective date.
Okay.
And you'll see the 2 different line items here.
Okay. That's what I was wondering, if it could all be on one, but okay, thanks.
Yeah, so right now the like having the payer and then the subgroups are just for having different locations versus different plans within the same payer or networks. All right. And so once you have your payers loaded and you have them linked to the locations that you need, you can launch tracking directly from this payer page. So how I would do that is just by clicking on the star of whatever I want to track. So you can see when there's more than one location associated, there's more than one star. That means when I click on this star, it will launch tracking linked to this specific location. And then you would have to open a separate one for this second location. So I'm going to do this Medicaid one as an example. And just a trick, if you hold down the control key when you click on the star, it will open in a new tab. So say I wanted to open a bunch of tracking at once, I could hold down control and click on all the stars that I wanted. And you can see they're just opening up in these other tabs. So I'll go look at this one. So you can see, because we launched this using the star, it filled in a lot of this information for me. So it filled in the provider name, the payer name, and the assignee. It automatically assigns to me since I'm logged in as myself. Any of this stuff you can change before you click start on the tracking report. Also, because we don't have a previous initial tracking report on file for this combination of provider, payer, and location, it's defaulting to be a payer initial tracking report. You can manually change the subtype here to any of these options that you have. It'll be team dependent what options you have in there because it depends on what tracking templates you have. But say this is actually recredentialing, then you would click the subtype recredentialing, and that will adjust the steps that appear in that tracking report. So for this case, I'm going to stick with initial. Maybe I want to change the assignee to Sue. I can change the start date. Say I know she started this actually last week. You can manipulate there if you need to, or if I want to change it back to current date, I can just check the box. I could also add a description. So if I'm assigning this to Sue, maybe I want to give her some background, new payer in this market, please enroll, or whatever I want to add as notes there. You could also add tags. So if you use tags for your group, you could add those there. So this is a buildable tag list. You can type in whatever you want, and it will also show you on a drop-down what tags you've used before. So say I wanted to do new to area or something as a tag, I can do that. All right. And then another thing just to note before we start is that before you start a tracking report, you have the ability to exclude steps. So you'll see next to each step before we start it, there's this checkbox for exclude, and you can exclude that step if you know it doesn't apply to this work that you'll need to be doing. So an example of that is maybe you know this payer doesn't require you to complete a request to participate. You could exclude that step up front, so you're not having to put in like NA or copy your same note over to the same one. Another good example of this is there's a step for doing the application through forms and another step for completing a paper online application. Clearly, you won't need to do both of those. So whichever one you know you don't need to do, you can exclude that. The one thing I'll say about excluding steps is just to keep in mind reporting. So if you're using any of the steps to calculate turnaround times or do any reporting, you want to make sure you don't exclude those steps, or you'll that will skew your data. So once you decide what to exclude, you can go ahead and click start. And I see another question, so I'm gonna look. All right, I think we're good actually. Okay, so once I click start, you can see that this looks a little bit different here. The steps have a place for you to document your notes. You can see the individual assignee is defaulted to whatever owner I set here. And you can add in your start and completed dates for each of the steps. So I'll just show kind of what that looks like. So for under notes, I can put whatever I want and just save the note. I can also email other coordinators on OneView through tracking just by clicking this email button. So if I wanted to send Sue something, it's on this provider, I could do that. And when I send it, this will go to her email that's associated with her coordinator accounts. This will go right to her work email. And it will also be copied into the notes and tracking. So we got our date and timestamp. We can see I sent it and it went to Sue, and it will include my subject line and the message. So there's a couple different ways to have notes there. You can also select the start and completed dates for when you did this step. So say Sue actually did this yesterday, we could add in those dates there. And when you're done with each step, just complete the step, and the system will move you on to the next one in line. So do we have any questions on working within the tracking report before I move on? Or Sue, do you have anything to add?
No, just a question about whether or not the steps have to be completed in order, or can they be completed out of order?
They can be completed non-sequentially, so you can do them out of order, but just keep in mind if it's really a process that's running in order, just for documentation, it's helpful if you follow them in order. So it kind of depends on what your workflow looks like. But for this, like a payer workflow, usually you are wanting to do these in order. Like it wouldn't make sense for us to do submitted before you complete the application. So just keep in mind, whatever steps you're actually completing, be sure to close those out. But for other types of tracking, like onboarding, it makes a little more sense to jump around between steps because you might be receiving information not in the exact order you predicted. So you don't have to do it in order, but just for reporting purposes, usually something like Payor would flow in order. And the reason I bring up reporting is because a lot of our reports will pull the last completed step and the in progress step. And if I went ahead and just completed this submission one, it would look a little out of order and maybe not pull what I'm looking for in that step. So We can do them out of order, but just make sure that that makes sense for your workflow. All right. Anything else, Sue, for this section?
That's good, Marie. Thank you.
Okay. So then I'm also just going to show kind of what this tracking report that I've started looks like from our tracking grid. So I'll go over here. So in this tracking section, we can see all the tracking that's currently pending or in progress in this team. Just a note on this grid, it does default to show pending and in progress, but under status, you can filter for other statuses. So if I'm looking for something for a provider and I'm not sure if it was ever done, maybe it was done in the past, I'll usually just filter for all statuses and then look for the provider name. So for this provider, I can see we've got a lot that were archived. If there were ones in completed status, those would show here too once I switch it to all statuses. So sometimes I'll be looking for information and wonder why the tracking's not there. It's just because it's completed or it's been previously archived. And I use this all status filter. If something has been archived and you want to see sort of what happened with it, or if there's a note, you can always restore it by just clicking this restore button. And then it will be back for you to check, and you can see if there's a note on why it was archived or sort of when in the process it stopped. And then beyond changing the status, just a note that any column on here is filterable and sortable. So like I can sort for type if I want to look just at onboarding, I can do that. I can click on a header to sort alphabetically, so you can see these switch order when I click on the header. And then you can also type in a filter. So like I did when I was looking at the different statuses, I can type in a provider name, a payer name, however I want to slice and dice that data, I can do that using these filters. All right. And then to just look at the one I just set up, I'm going to pull up this provider. He has a couple in process, it looks like, but I think this is the one I just set up. So from here, I have a couple like quick view options. So if I just mouse over the name of the payer, I can see a little bit more information without going into the full report. So here I can see who the payer is and the practice. I can see who created it and when. And I can see the provider, of course. So I can also see a kind of quick view of where I'm at in the process. So anything that's done will appear with a filled in star. If it's at or under the estimated number of days that we had set to complete that single step, it will appear green. If it's over that estimated number of days, it'll appear red. Then any step that's in progress will appear half filled in, and other steps will appear not filled in if they haven't been started yet. I can also scroll all the way to the bottom to see the most recent note. So I can see sort of what's happening on this tracking without fully opening it up. I can say, okay, it looks like this was just started. We're working on the app, and I emailed Sue for some updates. So that's kind of a quick view. You can also, instead of just mousing over the name, click on the name. And this is a quick way to open or to document notes. If you don't want to open the full tracking report, I could add a note right here. So I could add updates received and save the note, and that would show up right in tracking. I can also switch which step I'm documenting on. So if I say I wanted to go back a step and add notes on here, I'll see the notes previously, and I could add additional notes here. So this is kind of a quick way. Say if you're on the phone with a payer and they say, actually, we want to update you on this other provider too, you can quickly just filter for that payer and then say, okay, let me just go in and update the note on each of these without doing a full tracking report. And my shortcut of holding down the control key to open in a new tab, that works for opening the full tracking report too. So if you hold down the control key and click on this paper and pencil, which you would do to open it, that will open in a new tab here. All right, so that's kind of just a few shortcuts from this tracking grid. Other kind of tips I would say is, if you're the one who's doing the work in here, you can always filter for yourself as an owner or a step assignee. So if I'm filtering for Sue, she can quickly pull up what her work list is and see when her next steps are due. So that's helpful. Also for me as someone who manages work across multiple coordinators, I can look at this and say, oh, Sue's bandwidth, it looks like she has, just as a quick view, it looks like she's free to take on more since she just has these 3 tracking. So that's kind of a quick thing you can look at within the grid, the owner, or even the assignee. If I want to say, okay, which ones is the team lead assigned to on the individual step, I could do that as well. All right, any questions on sort of how to use the grid?
Looks like we're good, Marie. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so then I think the last thing I wanted to go over was just reporting. So you can see in this demo team, we have about 15 tracking reports. And for some clients, you might have a similar number. And like I was saying, you can use a lot of the shortcuts in the grid to manage your workflow. For other clients that have a lot of payers and maybe a lot of providers, new providers that they're enrolling to, or any other process where you just have a lot of tracking, it can get hard to manage hundreds and hundreds of tracking reports just right in this grid. So when you get to that point and you think managing this in Excel would be easier, we have reports to support that. So right from this tracking page, you can see next to this add tracking, there's this little down arrow, and this will give you the reports that you can pull. So this will let you pull open items, so anything that's pending or in progress, all items, which is literally every tracking report and every step within every tracking report, and then also notes, which kind of consolidates the notes from tracking. Personally, I use this open items one the most because I'm wanting to drive forward open tasks. I also use this all items sometimes if I'm going back and analyzing turnaround times, and then I need to look at turnaround times between individual steps. But for the most part, you'll use this open items. Another report that we have for you is actually accessible from the team screen. So if I go back over here, this is where the rest of our reports live that aren't specific to tracking. On this drop down next to alerts, you can see that there's a tracking all teams report. This is really similar to the tracking open items report, but it will actually pull tracking from all the teams that you're associated with instead of just the one team that you're currently in. So this can be useful when you're working across multiple teams, and instead of pulling down reports from each individual team, you want to consolidate across all the teams that you're working on and just say, bottom line, what's my work list or what's my team's work list, not what's my work list in this one client or group versus another. So if you're wanting it to be specific to the team that you're in, then pull open items from under the tracking section. If you're wanting it to go across multiple teams, then use this tracking all teams report. And just some background, by team, I'm referring to this name in the top left of the platform, and you have this drop down if you have multiple teams associated with your coordinator account. So if I run this tracking all teams, it will pull tracking across all these teams that I'm associated with instead of just this one. So I'm going to show you guys sort of what that can look like. I'm going to pull the tracking open items from the demo team. And then I'll also show you a report that shows what it looks like in practice for one of our larger clients. So let me pull this open items report. And to do that, all I did was click the down arrow and click on the open items. All right, so this is coming out into Excel. It really gives us more columns than we probably need, just so we have a lot of options and we can narrow it down to what we actually need. So the first thing I do when I open this up is click on the corner here to select the whole sheet, and then just double click between two columns. That will make all my columns the width that they need to be for depending what's in them. I'll also just make these headers bold so we can see more of what's going on. So now we can see a little bit more clearly that it's really giving me a lot of information. So I have tracking start date, the number of days that we're on, the owner of the tracking, the type, subtype, priority, and then it kind of goes from there. We get into the name, and we have, like I was saying, step information. This is the in progress step. And we also have last completed step information. So this is the last one that I did. And for each of those, they have dates associated with those and notes associated with those. So when I'm trying to manage across multiple teams or multiple tracking reports and just see what is the priority, using this Excel is really helpful. So, and then also just want to point out at the end, we have a link here that goes directly back into tracking. So if I follow this link, it will take me into the exact tracking report that that line item is referencing. So that's super helpful for, say, if I am working on this and I see a last completed step note that says something like urgent roadblock, like this can no longer move forward, or something that is like, wow, that needs some attention. I can just follow the link and go in to read more of what's going on with that tracking report. So what I usually do from this report is eliminate the columns that I don't need. And these won't be the same for everyone. It really is just what fits your business need. So if you need to keep any of the columns that I'm removing, that's totally fine. I'm just kind of deleting some to show what I would do usually. All right, so usually I'll keep the name, since that has the payer and the address. I'll keep provider name, obviously, and the type and subtype so I can filter down in the owner. For me and the way my team functions, I usually work off last completed step instead of step. But again, that just depends how you document and what you want to use. So for the purposes of this, I'm just going to remove the step information to make this a little easier to follow. Yeah, so again, I'm just only keeping the columns that I need to make it easiest to follow. All right, so now I've deleted some columns. This is a little more digestible. And once I've done that, I'll usually put on a filter. And from here, there's a couple different ways I can look at my data. So I can filter by provider name. So say, I want to say, okay, where's Brad at with all open tracking? I can do that and quickly look at my last completed step note, and I can see exactly what's going on. It looks like all of his apps are submitted or confirmed or completed. We're good. So that's a quick way for me to see that information without having to go in each tracking report. I could also, let me just clear the filter on here. I could also just say overall for all my open tracking, I want to sort last completed step date from oldest to newest to look at what hasn't been updated in a long time. And I can quickly see from here, okay, maybe these two need some attention because they haven't been updated since either June or July, and we're now getting into September. So I could just highlight those for my team and say, hey, could you please update these? They have a link that will go right into tracking, so they know exactly what needs to be updated. I can also sort by the owner. So if I wanted to say, okay, let's see what John Barry has in progress, I can quickly pull that up as well and look at his last completed step notes and see, okay, looks like his tasks are completed. So that's kind of a couple ways I could filter or use this report. Sue, did you have anything to add before I show the full sample report?
That's great. Thanks, Marie.
Okay, sounds good. So I'll kind of show you guys a report that we actually use for one of our larger clients. So this is a sample. I've changed some of the provider names and stuff, but the data in here is real. So for this coordinator on my team, she has 47 tracking reports that are on her follow-up list for the week. And how we get this is we just run the tracking all teams report, because you can see she's associated with 2 different teams that have tracking, but rather than send her 2 different reports, I just want it all consolidated in one place so she knows bottom line what she needs to work on. And what we do for this is we actually, just how it works for this particular client that we're working on, we pull up anything that requires a signature and highlight it. And the way that we do that is we just use the last completed step note and literally do control find for signature. And you can see that she sent to the client for signature on all of these. So that's why we highlighted them, because for us in our workflow, that's important. If we send something to be signed by a provider and they're not returning it, we want to make that a high priority to follow up on. So that's why we pull out that information and highlight it at the top. Otherwise, these things are included on her list, just if they haven't been updated in the last 3 weeks. That's just kind of the standard that we follow for this specific team. So we'll just do the last completed step date and sort oldest to newest. And then we remove anything that's been updated recently that doesn't need her attention, and only keep things on her follow-up list that either need a signature or haven't been updated in the last 3 weeks. So that's kind of how we operate it for this client, and everyone on our team gets this list every week so they can see what needs their attention. From there, they can kind of work the list however they want. So say they're, this coordinator, Ashley, is saying, okay, I'm gonna do follow-up with Amerigroup. I'm gonna look at everyone who needs me to follow up with Amerigroup. She can quickly sort and say, okay, I'm following up on these providers. I can see what my last note was, and it looks like she did the follow-up all at once for these, or the initial submission. And she can see when that happened and what her most recent note was really quickly without having to drill into the tracking reports in the platform, just because of her high volume. Maybe she prefers to do that out of Excel. So, and she could also filter by date, say, I only want to work on things that are the oldest. She could do that and just have her work list this way, really whatever works best for her. So we just get this information for her so she can work with it in Excel, and then from there, she can work it however she wants. All right, and any questions on this in the reporting?
I don't see anything so far.
Okay. And then was there anything else you wanted me to cover with just payers or tracking overall?
Maria, I'm not sure if you went back. Could you just give a scenario or a use case where you might use the complete all feature in the tracking system?
Sure. So within each tracking report, if I go into one, you'll see there's this complete all button available once the tracking report's been started. So that came out of a need we had from our internal team and clients when, say, I submit something and then it's a miracle, the provider or the payer approves it the next day. I don't really want to have to go through each of these steps, add in my dates, and click complete, because you can see how that would get a little tedious to do that for the remaining 10 steps or whatever. So what I would do for this instead would just be complete all, and that is much faster. So it's really available for when there's a change and you actually don't have to do all the remaining steps. You're already approved with the payer. I would just say when you're doing complete all, make sure that you're completing you're actually doing the actions in the remaining steps. So some of these won't apply like follow-up, but some of them will. Like we do need to still update OneView with the payer status and maybe notify the client, or yeah, just notify any stakeholders. So what I could do for this, because we said that steps can be done out of order, is just send an email. I'll send this one just to myself. And this goes back to our steps not having to be done sequentially. And I can say, I could still do the client notification and send that out. And make sure that I'm updating in OneView the status of the payer, and then go complete all. But so just make sure you're still doing the actions that are required there. And that actually reminds me of one other thing to point out. So when I was saying update the status in OneView, just wanted to point out that there's a couple of quick navigations to get back into the provider profile directly from tracking. So when I'm in a tracking report, I can click this folder button to go directly to that provider's documents, or I can click this healthcare provider icon. This will take you back into the payer section. So say I'm working on this and I actually want to update that payer status. I just click on this provider icon and I'm right back in here. This is still loading, but it'll take me to her payers. And I can update the status here. So maybe this one is now, let me go over to payers. Maybe this one is now changed from active to pending, or whatever that may be. You could add that information in there. All right, and then to get back to any in progress tracking, you would just click back on the star. So I'm gonna go over to my other provider I was working on. And just a note here, to move to the same section of the credentialing record for any provider, you use this little green caret here and just put in the provider's name. This will now take me to his healthcare payers. You can see that I have an in progress tracking because there's a half fold and star. If I click on that, I'll go directly back into this tracking report that I had started. If I want to go back to his profile, just click here. So Sue, anything else to cover here?
Nope, I think that's it. I think we've got no more questions unless anybody else has got any other questions to come back in. Anything?
No, I don't have anything. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Anybody else? Emma?
I'm good, thanks.
All right.
No, thanks.
All right. All right, Marie, looks like we're all set. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, bye.